Good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Daf Lamed Tes, continuing in the same theme. What happens if my animal is a relatively normal animal and it gores the animal of someone, as we learned yesterday, who's a goy, or if it was a case of my animal that gored an animal that belonged to Hektish. We also spoke about a case yesterday of my animal goring an animal that's a kusi. Do we say that the kusim were gerei arayo, saying that they converted out of fear of lions, or do we say that they were gerei emesheim v'chule v'chule? Today we're going to be discussing yet another version of my animal is normal and the animal that it gored was not normal. Let's see what the case is. Top of Lamed Tes Amud Aleph at the new Mishnah, 3 lines down. Shor shel pikeach shenogach shor shel cheresh shotev v'katan chayim. The halacha is that let's say my animal, that I am normal, I'm a bar das, and my shor is nogeach, the shor of a person who's a cheresh shote or katan. So the halacha is that they're chayiv. Why? Because I have das. The fact that my victim doesn't have das doesn't mean that I'm not chayiv. It's not. That doesn't make any sense. I did something wrong. However, if a cheresh katan has an animal, stam shayla, how do they have a kinyan if they have no das? Maybe it was bequeathed to them, but they own the animal. However, they own the animal, they own it. But because they have no das, therefore, if the animal of a chereshot of a katan gores my animal, and I'm a pikeach, I'm a bar das, the halacha is that they're pater because they're not a bar das. That's comment number 1 of the Mishnah. Comment number 2 sounds like a stira to comment number 1 and will become the crux of our Gemara. Shor shel chereshot of a katan shenagach. If we have an animal of a chereshot of a katan shenagach, a line ago, we said that they're pater for that ma'isa. Over here, we say bezdin ma'amid al apotropos, that bezdin will appoint for the chereshot of a katan an appointee, someone to manage their family estate. U'me'idin lahem bifnei apotropos, an edus is given in front of the apotropos, who kind of functions as a bailim of sorts, and therefore, seemingly, some kind of payment will be made. We don't yet know what that payment is, but certainly, line number 1 of the Mishnah, where it says that when a chereshot of a katan damages a pikeach's animal, that they're pater, this line seems to certainly conflict with that. And the last part of the Mishnah is very interesting. Nispakeach hacheresh. Let's say that the cheresh became healed. Nistafe hashote, the shote became healed. V'higdei katan, or if the child gets older, now he's a bar chiyuva, now he's a bar das. The animal is chazar letamusa divrei meir. It's a restart button on the animal. Right? But what does that have to do with the animal? So the answer is that we know, and we saw this already earlier in the Masechta, is that an animal can't become a muad without the das of the bailim. You can't have 3 occurrences without the bailim knowing. They need to have an opportunity to rectify the situation of their otherwise docile animal who's now behaving wildly. So if you only find out after the 3rd occurrence, that doesn't make the animal into a muad. They're still a tam. But here, even if they were a muad, l'chora, they get thrown back to their original phase of tamus. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no, harehu b'chezka, so whatever his original status was, it was, and it remains. Shor ha'itzdadin, if you have a shor that was paraded around for the sake of intentionally goring, the word itzdadin is a reference to stadiums, a very interesting alignment of an old word with a modern English word. The words do line up fairly well, itzdadin and stadium. The Gemara says that if you have an animal like that, then eino chayav misa. The halacha is that shor, if he kills, there's no chiyuve misa there, at least as it relates to the bailim shenemar ki yigach lo sheyagichuhu. That's if he gores on his own, but you provoked him. The matador holds up the red sheet. You're asking him to gore. So if that animal gores, that's not normal. That wasn't what the pasuk meant. In other words, so the dinim are going to be different by a stadium animal versus a regular animal, and that is the mission.
That would apply to different animals too. Let's say like a dog that's trained to kill.
Yeah, that's correct. I'll give you an example. When I was in Israel last 2 trips ago, we went to Caliber 3, which is this remarkable place where the Chayalim train. And they showed us this amazing thing about a dog, 1 little whistle, 1 little snap. The dog lurches through the front window of a car and barks and bites whatever he needs to do. So if you take that dog and that dog goes and kills someone, that's not normal. That's not a normal behavior like you're saying. It has to be that it's ki yigach on his own volition, but not sheyagichuhu, that we made him gore. That's the diuk from the pasuk, and it seems to be ladina. It would be true, therefore, like you're saying, of any animal, that if the animal would normally have a din of tam versus muad, those rules don't apply to an animal that you've trained or that you have provoked into damaging. The Gemara opens a quarter of the way down with a stira in the Mishnah, as pointed out already. Hagufa kasha, the Mishnah itself has an inherent problem. What was the resha? Amris, we had said, the first thing that we had learned was that if a chereshot of a katan's animal kills my animal, alma ein ma'amid an apotropos latam legabos migufa. We see that in the Reisha, we said two dinim in the first case of the Reisha. We said that if my animal gores a chereshot of a katan's animal, I'm chayiv, and if a chereshot of a katan's animal gores my animal, then they're pater. There we didn't appoint an apotropos. That's what the Gemara says. Alma ein ma'amid an apotropos latam legabos migufa. We do not appoint an appointee, someone to manage the animal of the chereshot of a katan in the Reisha. Yet a maseifa, shor shel chereshot of a katan shenagach bezdin ma'amid an apotropos u'ma'idin lehem bifnei apotropos. Alma, what do we see from the second case of our Mishnah? We do therefore see that even in a case of tam, even in a case where an animal was otherwise docile, and in this case it damaged, we therefore do appoint an appointee, someone to manage the chereshot of a katan's animal, and therefore we have a steer in our Mishnah. The Reisha seems to say ein ma'amid an apotropos, that we don't appoint an appointee to manage the animal of the chereshot of a katan. But the second, the mitzias of our Mishnah says not like that. The mitzias seems to say that we do appoint. What? So the Gemara responds halfway down. Amar Rava hachik tani. You're correct on your question. We just have to make sure that you're not an Amhaaretz in the answer. We have to make sure you understand what's going on. What does the Seifa mean when it says that we are ma'amid an apotropos? Rava explains. V'im huchzaku nagchanim. Oh, if they get a chazaka that they are now nagchanim, they're a goring type of animal, namely that they're in the category of a muad. When they start really misbehaving, let's call it 3 times of attacking, then and only then ma'amidin lehan apotropos, umidin lehan bifnei apotropos. And only after we appoint an apotropos do we have this possibility even of an animal becoming a muad. Now we understand. And just to say it in a balabatish way, the Reisha, where we are not ma'amid an apotropos for a chereshot v'katan, is a case of tam. It's a regular case of damages. There we're not ma'amid apotropos. But once the animal really starts to misbehave, Bezdin says, we can't leave it like this. We can't. It's dangerous for the community. So the Bezdin says they have people on their list of apotropsim, and they got this guy. You're in charge of family X. Their animal's going crazy. Once they appoint the apotropos to animal X, which is, again, the mitziasa, the middle case of our Mishnah, that's when we're able to then establish that animal as a shor hamuad, in which case the whoever's responsible for the finances, this guy Lechora would then take a check from the chereshot of a katan's estate and write a check to the victim for whatever damages were done. But here now we're talking about muad, so that's nezek shalem, and nezek shalem is always or almost always paid me'aliyah. It's almost always paid from the property of, and not migufo. That's clear. The first case is tan. Second case is muad in our Mishnah.
Me'aliyah is another word for edis?
No. Me'aliyah, when we talk about nezek shalem, means that you have to pay back the full value of the animal. When we're talking about a tam and the din is migufo, so the tam's halacha is that you have to pay chatzi nezek. And when you pay chatzi nezek migufo, I have to give you chatzi of my animal. However, when you're paying migufo, if my chatzi nezek doesn't reach that 50% mark of your animal, I'm no longer to pay anymore. I don't have to. If my animal is worth 80 and your animal is worth 100, so your animal, your chatzi nezek should be 50, I can only pay you 40. That's it. When you pay me'aliyah, you always have to get to the top dollar of your animal. It's an objective standard. It's not based on my animal. So that's what me'aliyah means in this Masechta in general. Mm-hmm. So the Gemara says me'aliyah asman. Who is the one who's actually paying the bill for the chereshot of a katan's animal's damages? Who is it? The Gemara says 2/3 of the way down. Rabbi Yochanan Amar me'aliyas yisomin. It comes from the estate of the yisomin. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar me'aliyas apotropos. They say it comes from the aliyah of the apotropos. So in the first case, we're saying it comes from the people who are having these challenges. It's interesting that it calls them yisomin, but the Gemara basically is referring to these people who are the chereshot of a katan, and then Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says no, it's the apotropos who's paying. Says the Gemara, Umi Amar Rav Yochanan Hachi. Does Rav Yochanan really say that it comes from these from the Yisomim? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi. The only time we tap into the nichse Yisomim is when they're being crippled by ribis payments from old transactions. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Olishtar Sheyesh Bo Ribis Oleksuvas Isha Mishum Mizone. But what's missing from Rav Yochanan is our case. What's missing from Rabbi Yochanan is the case of the Yisomim. That's not mentioned at all. So the Gemara says you're right, and therefore epoch, maybe we should reverse the shitas. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Me'aliyas Apotropsin, and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar Me'aliyas Yisomim. The Gemara says this is not a good answer. Amar Rav Mishum Dekasha, Rabbi Yochanan ad Rabbi Yochanan, because you struggle to understand Rabbi Yochanan's shita, you therefore kick the can down the road to Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. That doesn't make any sense. Was it Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Asi. Whose name was it? Rabbi Yossi. Thank you. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. So says the Gemara, that doesn't make sense. Mashvi Sleiler Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Toa. The whole shita doesn't make sense, Bichlal. You can't say the case of Yisovim. After all, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Daina Huvanach Islam Kodadina. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina was known for being a Dayan and known for going all the way to the very depths of the halacha. Could you imagine just the clarity? Like whenever somebody asks you a sugya, the whole sugya lives in front of you. Not the psak, not just the Mishnah Brura, not even just the Shulchan Aruch. Your brain goes pasuk, Mishnah, Gemara, Rishonim, early Achronim, Shulchan Aruch, Shachs and Tat. The whole thing is laid out in front of you like a crystallized structure. That's what it means. That we have to know Torah. That's our bar. Our bar is not just psak. If you want to be a posek, you have to know sugya is cold, and that's a big problem. I have asked this question when we were in Gross. I asked this question to every visiting Rav. How do you make sure that you know how to answer all the shilas that come your way? Some people gave me good answers. Most people didn't. Some people said, you'll keep a notebook. There's only 250 shilas a year that people actually ask. You just repeat them. There's a massive Pesach section. There's a medium-sized Hilchos Nita section. That's what he said, yeah. But that doesn't make you a posek. That was what I didn't like about that. That doesn't make you a posek. The only thing that makes you a posek is sitting and learning sugyas aliba de Hilchasa from A to Z and just not forgetting things. It's great. Perfect setup.
That's all.
Rav Shechter from YU says this all the time. He says, to know Kol Torah Kula, it's one bookcase, no big deal. That's what he said. I'm like, actually, Rav Shechter, it's a pretty big deal. I don't know about you, but you don't forget things.
It's a very big bookcase.
It's a very big bookcase, and that doesn't even include poskim. That's just Tanakh, and that's whatever the basics, as it were. Mishnayos, Shas. He said, I've said this here before. Rav Hershel Shechter said, if you want to be a posek, you have to know every single shach in your day, every single task. You have to know them at your fingertips.
Call them up on the spot to get it.
It's honestly annoying at some point. Like it's not normal how much they know. It's not normal. It's not normal. I'm a kind of that's my real kina in life. I'm not jealous of people's. What?
The test that they give for Smichas Chaver they're known for being pretty difficult.
Good, yeah.
Shechter said that if there's no question of it that makes him stop and think a little bit, it's like not hard enough. He doesn't want to cite his name on it. So I don't know what it takes to make him stop and think, but his tests are known for being very difficult.
One year, I think, because we had our twins that 1 year in Gross, I missed like a bunch of Siddharim before a Bechina, and Rav David Miller, the Rosh Kollel there, he said, just take the Rabbanut Smicha for whatever topic it was. It was like a Hilchos Shabbos thing. He said, open notes. I'm like, open notes. No problem. Took me like 30 hours to research every single element of the question. Hardest test I've ever taken. And I got a 52 in organic chemistry. This was much harder. At least in organic chemistry, if I would have had the book open or closed, it wouldn't have mattered. I didn't understand it. My dad was in Chicago and he knows that stuff cold. I'm in New York. It doesn't help. There's no FaceTime. I couldn't have him cheat for me. I was stuck. Here, I at least know where the Marim Makomos were to find them. Like, because whatever. Impossible test. Impossible. And there's nothing that these people don't know. The caliber is so high. So that's what the Gemara says about Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, that he wasn't just a dai. What didn't he know? Every aspect of he was mahapech. He knew everything perfectly in his hands. So it couldn't be that was the case. How then do we understand who pays in a case of muadus for the animal of a cher shot of a katan? Keep it the way it was before. Mazik shiny. The case of mazik is different. You're right in general that's true, but in general we would say that when there's a payment to be made, it's me'aliyas apotropos, no problem. That's fine. But a mazik shiny, Rabbi Yochanan me'aliyas is some of the amers me'aliyas apotropos. If you want to say that the person pays from the apotropos, b'mane v'lo abde, what apotropos is going to take on that job? Who's going to want to do that? By the way, you're going to go watch over family X. Their animal's out of control, and if something happens again, you're chayiv to pay. What apotropos is going to want to do that? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar, he says, don't worry. It is me'aliyas apotropos, but they can recollect the money before they depart their job. Once they get older, here clearly referring to a katan, that once they get older, they can submit for a reimbursement for all of the muad payments that they've made over the years. Now, we had said that our Mishnah, that the Reisha was a case of Tam, and the Seifa, the Mitziyasa, the middle case of our Mishnah, was a case of Muad. However, the Gemara actually debates whether or not that's true. Lamed Tesam, it based 3 lines down. Uma'amidin lahen aputropen latam lagabos migufo. In regards to our first case of the Mishnah, whether or not we assign an apotropos, a manager for the chereshot of a katan, even in regards to Tam, even in regards to the docile animal, just the first blush of violence with the animal of the chereshot of a katan, that is tanoihi. That's actually a machlokes tanoim. So really, in the workflow of our Gemara, this is answer number 2, because answer number 1 was Tam is case number 1, Muad is case number 2, and Tam we don't have an apotropos, and Muad we do. Here he says it's a machlokes in the first case as to whether or not we have an apotropos. The Tanya, 2-part brisa. If the nischarshu ba'alav, their owner became nischaresh, a cheresh, v'nishtatu ba'alav, the person became a shote, v'shahalchu ba'alav l'medina sayam, or if the animals were left alone, and the masters of the property went out of town. This is a machlokes tanaim in this case. Yudah ben Nekusa Amar, sumchus, it should be sumchus omer, nothing doing until edus exists for in front of the bailim. Namely, we're not ma'amid and apotropos for them. Whatever it is, they can be violent all day long. Bezdin and nobody assigns an apotropos in this case. However, so we see here that perhaps the Gemara is saying that our second answer is valid. We wanted to say initially that the ratio of our Mishnah was Tam, and the second case of our Mishnah was Muad. Says the Gemara over here, maybe the second case of our Mishnah is Muad, but the first case is Taka Machlokes Tanaim, as to whether or not we say in a case of Tam that we appoint a manager for the animal of the Chereshot to the Katan. Says the Gemara, Nispakeach HaCheresh, and now we're talking about the Seif of this brisa, that let's say the Cheresh became healed, V'nishtafe HaShoteh, the person who was in a crazed state became healed, V'higdil HaKatan, what?
And became a gadol.
Right. The higdil katan, yeah, he became a gadol. Or the people returned. A little bit interesting. Not all 4 of these cases were presented in the Reisha. We left out the case of the katan in the Reisha. I don't know why. But in the Reisha of the brisa, 5 lines from the top, it says, Nischarshu bailav, nishtatu bailav, halchu bailav l'medina sayam. It left out the case. I don't know why. I'm just raising the question. And I didn't notice it until about 4 seconds ago.
You never become a katan other than when you're born.
Just call it out. Just say what the problem is.
Well, no, it doesn't quite fit. These are all cases where they became.
Oh, that's correct. You're correct. No.
Right? Time was short, she's Harshu Bava.
Mm-hmm.
Bal became a chair. She wasn't originally.
He became a shota, and then he
adult never becomes a child. I mean,
but v'shahalchu ba'alav l'medina sayam. Societal comment noted. Got it. Thank you very much. I hope everybody on YouTube picked that up. But isn't the din the same with the katan?
But
I understand the categorization.
The answer is I think so.
Yeah.
I assume it just doesn't.
It's just odd.
Into the.
And why nischarshu?
Point because katan should have the same din.
He does have the same din. He has no das.
It's like. Yeah, no, that's for sure, I think.
I mean, you're right in the categorizations that it doesn't become a katan. It's true. Okay.
I just think as a memory aid in memorizing the brisa, it might have been easy.
I would have thought the opposite. Okay, that's what the Gemara says, that if if everyone either gets healthy or the higdil katan, or the person returns from out of town. Rabbi Yehuda ben Nekusa Amar Sumchas Chazal Tamusa Ashid Bo B'Tnei Baalim. Rabbi Yossi Amar Rabbi Chazkaso. And here we have a machlokes about Sumchus. What does Sumchus say? Chazar LeTamuso. He goes back to the tam state and only can become worse with edus. He can't become a muad without edus. Rabbi Yossi Amar Harehu B'Chazkaso. So in the Reisha, where we see that there's a machlokas between Yehuda ben Nekusa in the name of Sumchus and the Chachamim, that's where we see a machlokas in regards to the animal of B'cher Shotev Katan, who's a tam, as to whether or not we appoint an apotropos. And the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, analyzes this brisa with a couple of nekudos. The Gemara says, Amru, they said, and there's a little bit of a note here, which is Amre. It's not Amru. Amru is usually like a language within a brisa, Amru lahen. Here it really should be Amre. They said, meaning we're about to ask a question. What was meant by the phrase Harehu betamuso? The phrase Harehu betamuso was used by Sumchus in the Reish of the brisa, 6-7 lines down, where he said that if a person was, let's say, nischaresh, he became a cheresh, then we said the animal remains a tam. What does that mean, Dekamer Sumchus? What was he talking about? If you want to say that it means that it's impossible for this animal to become a muad, that can't be. Because we said in the Seifa that if a person is healed, then an animal is chazar letamuso, then it can go from the muad status back to tam, implying that there is a moment where where the animal actually can become muad. So Ella Maiharehu betamuso. It can't be that he can't become a muad. What does that phrase mean? Ella says, it doesn't say Ella. The Gemara therefore says Harehu bitmimuso. It remains in its fullness delo mechasrinanle, that we don't deduct any money. That means that there are no payments that are made in this initial phase before an animal becomes a muad. Alma, by virtue of the fact that we see that no payments are made, what does that show us about an apotropos? It must be that there isn't one. So says the Gemara, Alma ein ma'amid an apotropos latam lagabos migufo. We therefore see that the shita of Rabbi Yos, the shita of Simchus, again, party line, because we already saw this, but he clearly holds that ein ma'amid an apotropos, that there is no apotropos in this case. And if an animal, if the animal of a cher shotev katan damages the animal of a pikeach, of a bardas, the halacha is no payments, nothing. Tam, as long as the animal has no bailam watching over it, it's always a tam. There is no apotropos, and therefore, because there's no apotropos, there's no payments. What does it mean in the brisa when it says that's the end of the Resha? There, Alma, what do we see? By virtue of the fact that it talks about Ma'amid and Apotropos, that shows us Ma'amid and Apotropos lastes legabos migufo. We therefore see the Gemara's second position on our Mishnah, that perhaps in the Resha of our Mishnah, when we talk about a case of the animal of a cher shotev a katan goring the animal of a bardas, we see here that there's a machlokes tanoim between Simchus and the Chachamim as to whether or not we're Ma'amid and Apotropos in regards to the case of a cher shotev a katan's animal who is causing some damage. Okay, so two approaches in our Mishnah.
Here, Chacham hold this shar as a mood, right? So there's an apotropos, no?
No, but that he can become a muad. It's actually, the machlokes really is in a case of where damage was done as a tam. If we're ma'amid and apotropos, and it wasn't at the first time an animal gored, he only pays chatzin nezek. So level one is that the estates of the cher shotev katan through the apotropos would have to pay for the chatzin nezek. The second thing that can happen is, moving down the road a little bit, is that the animal can become a muad. Masha'en can, if you didn't have an apotropos, not only would they not pay chatzin nezek, but they certainly wouldn't become muad. So it enables a couple of things. All right, and this brisa that we saw, remember the brisa then turned gears, and 12 lines down or 10 lines down, it said nispakeach cheresh, or if the cheresh got healed, if the shote got healed, if the katan became a gadol, if everybody came back in town. There we also saw machlokes between Sumchus and Rabbi Yossi. So says the Gemara halfway down, almost exactly halfway down. We'll be going to Mem Amud Aleph about 10 lines down at the two dots. We still have a little ground to cover. The Seifa b'mai kamiflagi. What was going on in the Seifa? Says the Gemara. Fascinating discussion. Rishus meshana ika beinayu. We're discussing when the ownership of an animal changes. Not ownership in person, but when the person who wasn't functioning as a bardas becomes a bardas. That's what the machlokes is about. So let's just talk about the case of a person who's a shote. And I'll just use modern terminology. If a person typically takes medication to regulate psychosis, and now they're not taking their medication, and they're currently in a psychotic state, they are not a bardas. When their medications are now working perfectly, they're a bardas again. There are plenty of people that we all know who deal with these things every day, and they're totally regular people when they're medicated. When they're not medicated, they're not a bardas. When they are medicated, they are no problem. Normal. However, what happens when you go from not being a bardas to being a bardas is rishus mishana. When you now become healthy again, does that mean that your animal reverts back from its muad state back to a tam state? And that is where there's a difference in the seifa. Says the Gemara, sumchos sava rishus mishana. Sumchos holds that when there is a change from unhealthy to healthy, from cheresh to non-cheresh, from shota to non-shota. Sumcha says Rishus is Mishana. Rabbi Yossi Sava Rishus Eino Mishana. And Rabbi Yossi's language in the Mishnah was Harehu B'Chez Kaso. The animal stays. Just because the Bailim are the Baal is no longer a shota. What does that have to do with the animal? The animal's dangerous. So I could come up with a svara that the reason why Sumchus would say that Rishus is Mishana is because once the owner has das, he'll say, why is my animal misbehaving? Oh, there's a hole in the fence. Now that I'm well, I can build. Now that I'm a bar das, I can build a fence. I can put on a leash. V'chule. So there could be, and this I didn't say in the Rishonim, it's just a projection, that the real machlokes about Rishus Mishana is that now that I'm a bar das, perhaps I'll do a better job of watching my animal. And that's why they're having a machlokes about that. That brings us to a new brisa halfway down, of course, connected to what we're learning, which goes as follows. Tanu Rabbanon, Shor Chereshote V'Katan Shenagach. Reb Yaakov Mishalem Chati Nezek. Reb Yaakov should pay Chati Nezek. Says the Gemara, Reb Yaakov, Ma'e Avitte. What did Reb Yaakov do that Reb Yaakov is paying Chati Nezek? Says the Gemara, Ela Ema, Reb Yaakov Omer Mishalem Chati Nezek. Lest you think that we're the only ones with typos in Shas, this is expressly written in Shas that the word Omer was missing from the Brisa. So it makes me feel a little bit better that we're not the only ones who struggle with text and the Defusim Yishanim versus the Defusim Chadashim. Even the Oz V'Hadar compared to the old versions of the Gemara that have changes. Yesterday we learned about the censor who spoke about Kanani versus Nachri. We have a lot of challenges in the baselines of Shas, which is why sometimes learning a sugya halacha l'maisa can be very, very difficult. Can be, in this case, it's not so bad. But Kanani might mean Kanani and not Nachri. It's just not Pashut. So Shiva Amin.
You're right, talking Garcia. Before you missed it by Sumchus and you just put the word Omer and nobody flinched.
Right.
Rashi writes over here, don't make that mistake again.
But
I think that
Well,
is
you're
common.
seen it with
When
Yaakov
when somebody's
himself.
quoting somebody else, it's noticed that often leaves out the second.
that just happened at the top of the page with Sumchus.
Right.
But here it's odd because Rabbi Yaakov was only presented as the payer. He was never presented as the starter. There's a very odd presentation. But my point is that this is in the text of the Gemara. It's not like on the side and then Yeah, that's right. The what?
That you don't make the correction and say, oh, must have meant to say Omer.
Yeah.
Gemara says, and
That's
it's
correct.
Shas.
Oh, I see what you were saying. I thought you were saying he meant it in the long run. He meant it in the Havamina. Okay, good. Anyways, what did he do? Ela ema Rabbi Yaakov Omer Mishalem Chati Nezek. Okay, let's just simplify the din that in this case of Chershot V'Katan Shenagach, the animal has to pay Chati Nezek. This matches up with nothing we've learned. Nothing. So says the Gemara, B'maya Skinan. What is the case where we have a din of Chati Nezek? Ibetam, if you want to just say that this is a regular case of an animal that's a tam, Pshita, we're on Daf Lamed Tes of the Masechta that speaks about tam and muad. Everyone knows that a tam pays Chati Nezek, that's ABCs. So the Kulei Almanami, Chati Nezek, Hu D'Mishalim, everyone would agree in a case of tam that there's no Chiddush there. That can't be what the Mishnah means with Rabbi Yaakov. Can't be that it's coming to teach us a basic din. If you want to say that our Mishnah is talking about muad, so then let's analyze it from a shmira perspective. If the person did very good shmira, no reason for him to pay a penny. And if he didn't do a good enough shmira, then kule nezek ba'il shlomei, he has to pay nezek shalim. But mehecha teisi, do we have chati nezek? Either it's pshita, and therefore that can't be what it means, because either it's tam and it's pshita, and therefore it doesn't make sense, or it's muad, and there's no such thing as chati nezek by muad. So which case is it? So the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, Amar Rava le'olam b'muad v'hacha b'mayaskin, and really we're talking about the Brisa of Rabbi Yaakov where he says chati nezek. This is a huge break from the rules. This is a case of muad, and we're saying that the din is chati nezek. How in the world does this happen? This is a multi-step process, says the Gemara as follows. And how in the world do we have a case of an animal that's a muad that causes damage, that's only obligated to pay chati nezek? Says the Gemara, you did a fine job, you did an adequate job, but you didn't do a great job. We're not like, yay, you did extra care. You were average. You hit the minimum threshold. In Illinois, you only have to have a little bit of car insurance. Okay, you're not a tzaddik. You're following the law. But there's a smarter way to do this. So this guy only did a mediocre type of shmira on the animal. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't muad. So how do we get to chatzi nezek? So now we have to layer in a couple of things. The Rabbi Yaakov savar like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yaakov, who in our brisa was the one who said chatzi nezek, holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who says the Amar tzad tamus b'makoma omedes, that at the very least, in regards to this case of shmir, you still have to pay the tam aspects no matter what. That's part A. And part B is v'savar like Rabbi Yehuda damar muad sagi la b'shmir b'chusa. This was an acceptable version of shmira. This is a totally new reality. That means that because the shmira was acceptable, he doesn't have to pay chatzina, he doesn't have to pay nezek shalim, but he must still pay the tzad tamos shebo. He must still pay the aspects of the docile part, meaning at a minimum he would have had to pay that, and therefore he has to continue to pay that. This is a three-pronged answer to get us to the conclusion that Rabbi Yaakov says we're talking about a case of muad, and the punishment is only chatzi nezek. But the three layers that we need is to say, number one, that tzad tamus still applies. Number two is we have to say that the shmira b'chusa is considered shmira. And step number three is there must have been an apotropos, because it's a case of chershot v'kata. It's unbelievable. Why have we never seen this in the Masechta before? That we have a case of chatzi nezek that applies from a muad act. It's very rare. It's a lot of blood. It's a third of the Masechta. It's a lot. Also, I would have. I don't learn all the Tosfos, or I didn't learn most of the Tosfos, but maybe there is like, but we see. I know it doesn't. Yeah, I know. Yeah, just say you're not Haaretz. You should have learned Shas already by the time you're. Yeah, everything is still there. Yeah. Okay. Says the Gemara, Amar le Abaye v'lo pligi. You don't think that there's a machlokes over here? How can that be? V'atanya. Sure, shel chershot v'katan. Let me just articulate the question more. We said Rava gave an answer that our case of Rabbi Yaakov, where there's chatzi nezek, is talking about a case of muad, and Rabbi Yaakov holds like Rabbi Huda. That was what the Gemara presented. The Gemara says, Amar le Abaye v'lo pligi. You think Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Huda are on the same page always? They are definitely not. How do we know that? V'atanya. Shor shel chershot v'katan shenagach. If you have an animal that belongs to a chershot v'katan and it gores, Rabbi Huda mechayev. Rabbi Huda says that they're chayev. Rabbi Yaakov omer chatzi nezek u'demishalem. Oh, Abaye calls this out. You said just now that Rabbi Yaakov is quoting Rabbi Yehuda, and that's how we got to the din of chatzi nezek in a case of muad. Says the Gemara, says Abaye, you can't do that because we have an explicit brisa that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov argue with one another. One says mechayev, which implies nezek shalim. One says chatzi nezek, which is chatzi nezek. They don't agree. So it's a great kasha on the first approach of the Gemara. The Gemara says, yeah, but you didn't look very carefully. Amar Rabba bar Ula, ma shemechayev Rabbi Yehuda, piresh Rabbi Yaakov. Let's look back at this brisa. Shor shall, we're 15 lines from the bottom. Shor shall chershot v'katan shenagach. Look at the language. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev, he obligates him to pay. Rabbi Yaakov omer, how much does he have to pay? Meaning Rabbi Yehuda is being mefaresh Rabbi Yehuda. He's saying, what did Rabbi Yehuda mean when he said mechayev? Omer hachanam Yehuda mishalami. That chatzi nezek Yehuda mishalim. That's fine. It's not a stira. It's not a machlokas. So we wriggle out of the Abaye question by saying that it must be that one was just explaining the other. Says the Gemara, but wait 1 second. Ule Abaye to Amar, please. According to Abaye, who clearly didn't accept this response, he didn't like the answer that Rabbi Yaakov's shita was simply clarifying Rabbi Yehuda's shita. So then, Ule Abaye to Amar pligi b'maya pligi. According to Abaye, who says that there is a machlokes, what is the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov? Says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom, Lamed Testament Beis, Omar Lach, Abaye would explain as follows. Hacha b'maya askinan, b'muad velo natre klal. We are dealing with a case where the animal is already gored multiple times and the animal is a muad, and the bailim were completely irresponsible. He undid the leash. That would be a case of mazik. He left the door to the gate of the lion in the lion cage open. Irresponsible. The Rabbi Yaakov savar la Rabbi Yehuda bechado palagale bechado, and Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Rabbi Yehuda in one case and disagrees with another. How so? Savar Rabbi Yehuda bechado. Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda savar tzad tamus b'makom omedes. He agrees that the tzad tamus shebo, at a minimum, the minimum payment of my animal goring your animal should be the tam payment, which is 50%. And he disagrees with the following of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda savar Rabbi Yehuda agrees that there should be an apotropos there. Rabbi Yaakov savar ein ma'amidim v'lo mashalim ela palga lemuad. And when Rabbi Yehuda adds in an apotropos, that turns the payment into nezek shalim, because as we pointed out earlier, an apotropos can be there long enough in order to establish that the animal of the chershot of a katan is mishalim nezek shalim. So Abaye looks at this whole sugya and says, no problem, I understand Abaye perfectly. Abaye says, I've got it. He says, Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion of nezek shalim. The formula for Rabbi Yehuda to get to nezek shalim is the tzad tamus shebo with an apotropos. So the tzad tamus is natural, and the apotropos adds in the muad component, that's nezek shalim. Ma'ashein ken, according to Rabbi Yaakov, the tzad tamus shebo is there and you should pay it, but there's no apotropos to make him into a muad, and that's how Abaye understands this machlokes between them. 3 lines from the bottom. We've got about 12 lines to go. Amar le Ravacha bar Abaye le Ravina. I understand the approach of Abaye to say that there's a difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov. But according to Rava, who says there's no machlokes, we've spent so much time establishing this brisa of Rabbi Yaakov to be like a muad. Nukma betam. We could have understood this brisa to be talking about a docile animal that pays chatzi nezek. And what would the chiddush have been? Because if you just say it's tam, there's no chiddush. The Gemara says on the top of Mem Amud Aleph, le Rabbi Yehuda. If you want to say that we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda, the avad le shmira b'chusa velo avad le shmira me'ula. He has a standard of shmira b'chusa versus shmira me'ula. Hold on one second. This ratio. That should be Rabbi Yaakov. Is there Rabbi Yaakov? Someone in the art scroll there? We're 10 lines from the bottom. We're on the top line of Mem Amud Aleph, the very top. It's Rabbi Yehuda? Okay. I was right the first time. But I don't understand that. But let's try and figure it out. Ela the Rabbi Yehuda. Well, this is part of the brisa that follows, but I still don't understand it for another reason, but we'll discuss that in a second. So how could we have understood the brisa of Rabbi Yaakov as a case of tam, of dealing only with a non-violent animal? Says the Gemara, Ila Rabbi Yehuda, the avad le shmira pechusa velo avad le shmira me'ula, where the standard of shmira, this taka does make sense, where the standard of shmira is pechusa. You just have to do a minimum, close the gate, lock the gate, put a padlock on, that's enough. But it wasn't excellent. And Iler Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, the lo avi leishmira klal. In that case as well, the Tanya. Where do we see the case of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer echad tam ve'echad muad sheshamran shmira pchusa pturin. That you're going to be pater in such a case. So it says the Gemara, well, kamashmal and Rabbi Yaakov the ma'amid and lehana putrop and latam legavos migufo. Maybe, says the Gemara, the chiddush of the brayse of Rabbi Yaakov is that even though normally a chereshot of a katan is pater, but here there's an apotropos in the case of tam. Maybe that's what Rabbi Yaakov's brisa was teaching us. That would have been a beautiful way to explain the brisa. So says the Gemara, no, you can't do that. Amar lehachi ka'amar. Chada de isbe tarte taima. Really what we're doing is we're answering the brisa and teaching 2 dinim. Number 1, we're teaching that the brisa of Rabbi Yaakov is talking about a case of muad. And number 2 is we're teaching about the fact that there is an apotropos. It's a bigger chiddush, and that's why we're going with this case. Says the Gemara, Ravina Amar, that there's another possible way to understand how Abaye's question from above about whether or not there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda. Ravina Amar, that maybe they agree in principle, but still there's a difference between them. Amar Rishus Meshana Ike Benayu, similar like we said before, that maybe there's a difference between Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda in regards to Rishus Meshana, which we pointed out is when the Cheresh becomes healed, when the Shota becomes healed, or where the Katan becomes a Gadol. The Gemara says, the animal was a muad, it was already declared as dangerous. Rabbi Yehuda Savar Hareu Bechezkaso, the animal does not change. And Rabbi Yaakov Savar Rishus Mishana, he holds that it does change. So one way or the other, whether or not we agree with Abaye's approach that there is a machlokes, or with the other Amoraim's approach that there isn't a machlokes, Ravina adds another possibility that maybe fundamentally they do agree and there is no machlokes in general, but there still is a nafkamina in regards to their shitas, which is in regards to Rishus Mishana. Mirz Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up in person at 8:45. Today's Monday, tomorrow's Tuesday, so tomorrow 8:45 in person. Wednesday 8:45, but only on Zoom. Thursday I don't know, and Shabbos with David Merzel. Wishing you all a beautiful night.